Well. Here we are. Here we are again with the two-time 2021-2022 blockbuster video game champion. Apathy, inertia, synergy, Princess Diana, Captain Planet. Go. Well, I can only assume you all have found your way here to look at yet another edition of this year's, now preseason, power rankings for the Hannibal Dynasty League. Well, let's go ahead, take a gander at what we got here. Get out of here. And now my goal, as it stands right now, is to not spend 50 minutes on this video. So, we will jump in as fast as possible and try my hardest to not spend as much time talking about everybody. All right, we're only a minute and a half in. So, as you guys remember, there are 12 teams in the league. 12. And while I am... you do factor in previous year's production. You got to realize, number one, as we'll go over later, there's a lot of trades this offseason. I probably count, close to 12 decent-sized trades between February and now. So pretty decent offseason, not even including the young bucks some of y'all brought in during the draft. So stuff is up in the air. Bench players are developing, especially as, I won't say names, but we have rosters that have certain young running backs and young receivers who now in year 2, year 3 might be looking ahead to having a little bit more production. So, starting at number 50. And before, and I know you guys are going to ask, because it just makes sense, right? It's logical. There's only 12 teams in the league, Nick. How on earth is there a number 50 out of only 12 teams? And I'm so glad that you asked that question, because there is a certain team in this league that throughout the ending of last season decided to conduct itself with a distinct and utter lack of integrity and American spirit. We won't name names. I'm sure that everyone is aware of potentially what went down at the end of last season, involving the Integrity Bowl that occurred in the second round of the playoffs, and perhaps some illegitimate shuffling and shady dealings under the table of free agent quarterbacks to try to screw one over Mr. Two-Time. And alas, none of it succeeded. So, you got some people out here willing to spend every penny and lick every shoe trying to get a win out here. So at spot number 50, with dignity and integrity on par with the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, Tanya Harding, the most recent Houston Astros, and Lucas Carroll's dice rolls every time that he tries to roll up a D&D character. At number 50. As such, later in the rankings, we will discuss the spot that this team would have been at had they not tainted the spirit of fantasy sports everywhere and disappointed all of their current and future children. Onward to the people who belong on this list, starting at number 12. And it always breaks my heart. You gotta put someone at the back of the list. But at number 12, your toilet bowl king, we have Sunshine. 4-10 last season, the winner of the toilet bowl. And there's a lot of questions on this roster when you look up and down. There's a lot. When we're starting at the top, Josh Allen is maybe the only really proven player. Antonio Gibson seems like that running back who just kind of ventures around to everyone's fantasy roster at some point or another because Washington just can never figure out what to do with him. So, remains to be seen if he'll produce here. Samaje Perine, I'm a fan of him in maybe the first month, 6 weeks of the season as they ease Javonte back. But past that, I don't know as much value that will be coming from him later in the season. We'll have to see. It'll partly depend on how Russ comes back in the season. When you see stuff like Nico Collins at the flex, you wonder if the talent is there for this roster. Fairly weak bench up and down here for Sunshine. Multiple backup QBs, multiple tight ends. There's not really a player on this bench that you would look at and say you could trust them in a pinch. I won't say that there's nothing here. There's players I like, young guys. There's John Mechie coming back off of his diagnosis from leukemia last year and playing for Houston, who now has their quarterback situation not resolved because won't know until Stroud plays, but, we'll get to that point. And guys like Luke Musgrave, who I'm a big fan of in Green Bay, who may even take the starting tight end job early on this season. But one of the weaker running back combos in the league, I will say the one sneaky potential on this team is its starting wide receiver. Calvin Ridley, now coming off his suspension, may be a true number one. Deontay Johnson is due for positive regression after scoring, that's right, 0 touchdowns last season. Now, if he could go ahead and continue to score 0 because Pittsburgh sucks large toes, then I'd be okay with that. Onward to number 11, your toilet bowl prince, Steven, who went 5-9 last year. And you'll find a common thread among some of these lower tier teams. We begin with questions at running back, questions at wide receiver. The true blood kind of wild card of the roster is obviously Justin Fields. He's kind of a trendy, huge fantasy pick going in some people's top 5 among quarterbacks, like 4th or 5th quarterback off the board. A few people even giving him some MVP pub, which I think is perhaps a little premature. We're questioning it at running back. Najee was supposed to ascend this past year, and instead his efficiency fell. Jaylen Warren is now getting even more hype in their offense. Pacheco, we've seen some injuries towards the end of last season, and then coming into this year, it's always going to be iffy to get great running back production from a Kansas City running back because while Mahomes is there, why would you not throw it 45 times a game? Questions at receiver. I like Drake London. I think he's talented, but the Falcons don't love to throw the ball. Even with Ritter there, we'll have to see if he winds up being better than Marcus Mariota. But if they don't throw the ball, it doesn't matter. Now, Drake London was very efficient on the routes that he did run last season. I think he was among the top 10 in yards per target, at least. He just didn't get a lot of targets. It may have been yards per route run, but I can't quite remember. DeAndre Hopkins, still the potential to be a stud, but now he's on a declining team with iffy quarterback play, depending on how you view Tannehill, and he's at probably the downslope of his career in a rushing-centric offense. So we'll have to see on D-Hop. Oh, did I put the Nico Collins thing in the wrong thing? That is, I read that for the wrong one earlier. That's actually Steven. Whoops. But I do like some pieces on this bench. Kadarius Toney, Cole Kmet, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Young guys, pass catchers, who have a lot of potential. Particularly, I know the Chiefs fans want to focus on Kadarius Toney. We do have the injury for him to worry about, but it seems he's coming into week 1 healthy. I don't know. It's hard for me to know. Toney is immensely talented, but there were reasons that it did not work out for the Giants. Part of it could have been quarterback play, and he just didn't want to play there, but that's different with Mahomes. We'll have to see. Now he has to step into a bigger role because you have McCole Hardman out the door, you have Juju out the door, and now with the Travis Kelce injury, which we'll get into a little bit later, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what Toney winds up getting into. Number 10. Off of the worst season in the league, even getting a bye in the toilet bowl with a 2-12 record, the Tissue Bandit. Colton's starting to ascend a little bit, and now while I don't want Steven Sunshine to be like, no, that dude had the worst record in the league. Why is he above me? All right, well, first of all, Colton's the one guy in all fantasy football leagues who draws boos for starting Deshaun Watson. So go ahead and throw your rotten tomatoes at him now. Just chuck those his direction. But is this the year? that Colton's long-term play begins to pay off. We have Bijan on the roster now, just named RB1 the other day. Jahmyr Gibbs was on the roster, shipped over to me in exchange for Devontae Smith, which adds more receiving talent. Breece Hall getting healthy. Christian Watson, now the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. DJ Moore now in at least a more explosive offense because he's now there with Justin Fields, and it looked, preseason-wise, like they had very good chemistry already. Kyle Pitts, again, the Atlanta, are they going to throw thing? But if they do, he is still maybe the most physically gifted tight end in football. Remains to be seen. And then, like I said, Devontae Smith. Interesting to carry a good handful of backup quarterbacks. To be clear, what is happening? Hello? Oh, all my freaking screens just blacked out for a second. Anyway, 3 backup quarterbacks, so 4 total quarterbacks on this roster, I believe. A few interesting bench pieces: Dameon Pierce, Jerry Jeudy, if he gets healthy and Russ has his bit of resurgence, Tyler Boyd, Evan Ingram, who I think is sneakily probably a top 8 tight end this year, if Jacksonville can get it going. But number 10 there for the Tissue Bandit. Coming to number 9, 6-8 last year, out in the first round of the Toilet Bowl, CJ. And when we take a gander at, let me make sure I have his full roster here. At now that the fella who likes to change his team name perhaps the most, currently sitting at Daddy Big Boy. At number 9, we have some aging running backs. Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, not quite as old, but getting towards the end of maybe his time in Cincinnati, and then past that, who's quite sure. Aaron Jones now on more of a definitive timeshare with A.J. Dillon, especially now with a young, unproven quarterback. I know he's been in the system there for 4 years, but he's never really been the starter. I think he started 2 games, 1 game maybe in that time, so they may skew towards leaning on that run game, but we'll have to see. So it's going to require maybe a bit of a last hurrah for Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon for this team to start to compete this season. A weaker wide receiver core for now in Michael Pittman and Jordan Addison. I like both of those players. I think they're talented players. The problem with Pittman is now, especially once Jonathan Taylor is healthy, and if they can get him to come back, that is still, and especially with Anthony Richardson's legs as an option now, that is a very rush-heavy offense. Pittman's targets have been there for the past couple years, but the people keep expecting him to ascend to at least that wide receiver 2 status. Terry McLaurin and T. Higgins and some of these guys. Actually, if I remember right, both of those are on the same team in this league. But he's just never quite taken that leap. So we'll have to see there. And then Jordan Addison, who I, again, like, wide receiver, probably going to wind up being wide receiver 2 in Minnesota. He's still, I think, fighting for targets there with KJ Osborne, who I was a fan of last season. Kirk is always going to be a guy who gets his receivers volume. Justin Jefferson, everyone was thinking, he obviously had a fantastic season and everything, but he had a 26% target share last year. So that means only about a quarter of the balls that were going out there were going to Justin Jefferson. So there are still plenty of targets to be had. Adam Thielen is gone now. Irv Smith, even though he rarely played because of injury, was still a receiving target, gone now. Dalvin Cook, gone now. In steps Alexander Mattison. They're going to want to, until they can figure out what Madison is, they're going to try to probably lean on that passing game, especially with the addition of T.J. Hawkinson last year. Jordan Addison can have a good year fantasy-wise, but I think it may take him 6, 8, 10 weeks before he really gets going, potentially comes on strong late in the season. Let's see. What else are we looking at here? What else are we looking at? I question tight end Irv Smith. While he is a Bengal, I don't know if he's a viable fantasy tight end. I am a bit concerned about DeAndre Swift, as it seems like Philly is going with a true, legitimate running back by committee with that almost goes 4 or 5 deep. DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott, Rashard Penny. There's just a lot there on top of Jalen Hurts' rushing. There's some young, deep potential there in Sky Moore and Alec Pierce. Probably the highest end one there being Quentin Johnston, who from all accounts, is probably going to be with a wide receiver 4 starting for the Chargers this year because Josh Palmer has probably won that wide receiver 3 job. They don't necessarily run their wide receiver 3 as a slot the way other teams do, a la a Tyler Boyd or a Hunter Renfrow, because Keenan Allen winds up doing a lot of that work. So right now, with Josh Palmer as an outside threat, Mike Williams as an outside threat, there is not a lot of volume for Quentin Johnson to go around. So we'll have to see how that situation shakes out over time. So that brings us then to number 8, 5-9 last year, out in the first round of the Toilet Bowl, our current and only leading lady, Soraya. A team that always feels a little bit stuck in the middle. There's nothing bad here if you look up and down this roster. Strong at quarterback, very strong at running back with Barkley and Pollard. 2 very good wide receiver 2s in T. Higgins and Terry McLaurin. Darren Waller, now due for an uptick in production with the Giants and getting out of the bad situations he'd been in before, hopefully being able to finally get healthy. Even last year, even though it wasn't elite, there was production to be had with the Giants with someone like Daniel Bellinger, who started at tight end for them for a good portion of the year. Now they'll have someone with a significantly higher ceiling at the position. So we'll have to see if Danny Dimes can throw more than, 15 touchdowns over a 17-game season, but we'll have to see. J.K. Dobbins, even at flex, I don't love him this year, but, still a decent pick. But when you look up and down, you don't see a whole lot of, outside of probably Barkley, strong blue chip talent. Players that you can set and trust they're going to bring you 18 to 25 every single week. Maybe could be a trade target here for running back needy teams, because as you look towards the bench, one of the strongest top to bottom running back groups in the league, Barkley, Pollard, J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery, and Rachaad White. 5 deep at running back, with Rachaad White being kind of a trendier pick this offseason now that he's probably the leading back in Tampa. So potentially a trade target here. Potentially she decides, you know what, I have a surplus here. Let's try to flip this into something else. So a team that perennially seems stuck in that mid-range, and I'm not sure what needs to change, but I don't know. You never want to be stuck in that range for too long. Heading on to number 7, and I'm sorry, don't be mad at me for putting you perhaps lower, but I do have nice things to say. 10-4 last year with a first-round bye due to a division title, and then a loss in the postseason to our very own Jake King. At number 7, I have Ryan. Now, Ryan, before you get mad at me, okay? Just let me defend myself here. Very, very high upside team. This is probably my pick for the team that, when I'm redoing these rankings at quarter of the season, I think Ryan's team is the most likely team to make a big jump. Because if you look at the potential up and down, the only reason it's lower here is because I just need to see a couple things, all right? With Trevor Lawrence, is this now going to be the huge year 3 explosion that everyone's expecting? MVP talk and all of this stuff. Javonte Williams obviously had been the high potential guy there, but now coming off the ACL tear, and they signed Samaje Perine and had some modifications to that offensive line that even those got altered with stuff like injuries to Mike McGlinchey. So I just need to see Javonte come back a little bit. James Cook, similar situation, not coming off of injury, but there's been other changes in Buffalo. And now that Devin Singletary is out the door, they made the deal over the past, I think in the past year or so, sent Zach Moss out to Indianapolis. Now James Cook is the guy. But Buffalo doesn't love to use their running backs, which is a little odd given how strong their passing game tends to be. He's a guy who can play all 3 downs. It's just, do they decide to allow him to do that? If they do, James Cook is a top 15 upside kind of guy, so I just need to see it first. Very strong at all 3 receiver spots as far as I'm concerned. Stephon Diggs, still a true blue fringe top 5 receiver in fantasy. Chris Olave, who I'm very, very high on this season, now that he's going to have much more consistent quarterback play. And he is, as of right now, especially with the Kamara suspension, he's probably the only legitimate threat in that offense. So while he will draw doubles, he's still probably going to produce at even a higher clip than he did last year. Even by the advanced metrics they did earlier in this offseason from ESPN, the hit like their kind of open score and all this thing. They test them off of like their open score and their catch score and all these different individual metrics. And there were a bunch of, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and then Chris Olave was in that mix for a lot of those. Very high on Chris Olave this year. And then Brandon Cooks at flex. I'm also pretty high on this year. Now the legitimate, unless people are missing something here, the legitimate number 2 in Dallas. Michael Gallup is probably going to wind up being their third guy. Dalton Schultz now out the door. Zeke out the door as a guy who played much more in passing downs than Tony Pollard did. And Dak being another guy who's a trendy resurgent pick now that Dallas is starting to get a little healthier, getting talented in important positions. Their defense is going to be probably top 5 in the league. Very trendy pick, Dallas, this season. And I like Brandon Cooks to produce at a high level in that offense. I will say perhaps one of the weakest benches in the league. There's not really a player here that I would trust in almost any spot. Maybe a KJ Osborne in a really bad pinch, but I don't know. I think this team is very dependent on health, so we'll have to see how that pans out. Heading to number 6, and a bigger jump than perhaps one would have expected, but there's been a lot of moves here between the middle of last season, this offseason, trades, draft, all that stuff. 3-11 last year, out in the second round of the toilet bowl. Maybe higher than it perhaps deserves, but I have Corey at number 6. Purdy boy swag. Gets the edge here at 6 over Ryan, mostly because of bench depth, which we'll come back to. Rodgers and Purdy should be a solid enough quarterback combination to cover all of your bases for the season. You're not. I don't think that Rodgers. I think Rodgers has passed his MVP days, but he's in a hopefully more productive offense now, and with the offensive line still being kind of a question, he has even though people like Christian Watson is not Garrett Wilson, and he has now the young stud, another number 17, a la Devontae Adams, to help him kind of carry that load. But if he doesn't, if Purdy continues what he did late last season when he came on, between the two, should be fine. And then you look at the running backs here. Dalvin Cook, that is one of the biggest questions on the roster, because who gets the touches in that Jets backfield? Breece Hall was the guy they were super hyped about all offseason. He's healthy now. They're going to try to ease him back. But Dalvin Cook is not a guy you bring in to get 7 touches a game. He's still Dalvin Cook. Even if it's not Dalvin Cook from 3 years ago, he's still Dalvin Cook. So we'll have to see how the workload winds up going there. Derrick Henry, obviously a stud. Devontae Adams is excellent. But Deebo at this point, Deebo Samuel is a rather big question mark, because he had the one elite season, injuries, and then this past season especially, where was the return to form at all, especially once quarterback got a little more situated under Purdy. Deebo just never has really been able to re-grasp that one elite year of production. Part of that being the team has continued to expand their other offensive weapons. Brandon Ayuk is a legitimate wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and more of a true receiver than Deebo is. But past that, even all of the other motion offense stuff that they do, and the jet sweeps and the movement out of the backfield, they don't need Deebo to do that now, because when George Kittle is healthy, he does a lot of the H-back work, and then they traded for McCaffrey, who does all the rest of that stuff and probably does it better than Deebo does. So now he's in this odd, amorphous middle ground where we're not sure exactly what he is. So big question on Deebo there. But it swings in Corey's favor that we see potential high bench production. Jonathan Taylor obviously being the biggest name. If he's healthy, if he comes back, be it for Indy or for someone else, he is still going to be a very high upside running back as long as the scheme is there to give him the volume. Odell Beckham potentially going to be the full wide receiver 1 in Baltimore's offense, which now moves to the Todd Monken system, significantly more pass heavy. If Lamar can execute that offense, Odell has a chance to not be at the upper end, the Devontaes and the Diggs and the Cooper Kupps and the Jamars and the Justin Jeffersons, but he has a decent chance if he can stay healthy in that kind of offense to put on a productive year. And even Cortland Sutton, I think, like we talked about earlier with Jerry Jeudy staying healthy, if Denver can return to form and if Sean Payton can fix Russ, then potential there for Cortland Sutton. On to number 5, 9-5 last year, and the league runner-up, losing in the championship game, Jake. Last year's sneaky team with the big run in the middle of the year and rode that all the way to the postseason. Obviously, you're always going to get big fantasy production out of Lamar Jackson, especially with the high floor because of the rushing numbers. And now we'll see. He's got the best weapons that he's had in his career. We'll have to see if the new offense is going to be something that works with him. Potential questions at running back, not because of talent, but both teams, as Jake has Kenneth Walker and Ramondre Stevenson. Both teams spent this offseason bringing in other options in the backfield. New England bringing in Ezekiel Elliott to take a lot of the kind of bruiser work and the passing down work. And in Seattle, despite Kenneth Walker having a very good year last year when he was healthy and able to play, drafting Zach Charbonnet in the second round. That's not a flyer pick. Second round is a very high pick for a running back. They did not draft him to simply have him back up Kenneth Walker. So, for both of these guys, is the volume still going to be there now that there are other options there in the backfield? Very strong at receiver here. One of, I think, the strongest picks that you can have at receiver in redraft leagues in Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's going to explode in Detroit. They have one of the best 4 or 5 offensive lines in football, which is when Jared Goff plays at his best. And with a more dynamic run game that they have now, especially if Jahmyr Gibbs can stay healthier than DeAndre Swift ever did, I think there's a lot of play there for Amon-Ra St. Brown to continue to get volume. I mean, over the past 2 years, he's averaged, I don't know, 11 targets a game, something like that. So a lot to like there. Very solid running back platoon options. Zeke, James Conner, who I think is actually kind of a sneaky like RB2 kind of player. Jamal Williams and Rashard, Penny from freaking nickel dime from Philadelphia. Although again, concern there only because big running back by committee doesn't. It's like the Patriots for 8 or 9 years. You never wanted to draft a running back from there because you never knew who was going to get the touches. And then some upside at receiver, more unlikely in one case than the other. Michael Thomas is never going to be the Michael Thomas he was again, but if he's healthy, he can be back to an okay spot. And then George Pickens, obviously being the darling of the offseason, despite the fact that he can't separate from anybody, and he commits offensive pass interference on every play. Oh my gosh. Sorry, Annika's been getting me sick. Okay, so that brings us to number 4. 10-4 last year. A loss in the first round to the two-time himself, Michael, one piece of the vicious trio at the top of the Hoenn division, who all went 10-4 or better. There's a lot to like here with Michael's roster. At almost every spot, Kirk, always a stable pick. Good old Kirk Cousins, stable pick as a fantasy QB. And I think it's slept on a lot. A lot of times he finishes like fringe top 10, and people act like he's, a bottom third of the league quarterback. Just nonsense. And then at running back, high upside here, or a high ceiling here, should I say, because we know what Josh Jacobs is. He was the best running back in fantasy last year, outside of Austin Eckler maybe, and depending on standard versus PPR. Alexander Mattison is the one that everyone wants to know. Does he get the load that Dalvin Cook got? Because if he does, or if he produces like he did when Dalvin Cook was hurt before, then Alexander Mattison is a top 10 running back. But we'll have to see how they decide to utilize him. Strong wide receiver options. Tyreek is Tyreek, and that offense is only going to get even better. The only question mark I think there is they did basically nothing to address the offensive line in Miami, and that got even worse with the injuries that they had this preseason to Teron Armstead. So if they can't keep Tua upright and they're having to resort to, I think Mike White is the backup now there. Well, actually, maybe he's a Hall of Famer the way that he plays sometimes, so who knows. But That's the only question mark really there in Miami. And then, like I said earlier, Brandon Ayuk, a legitimate wide receiver 2 on a lot of days, and seemed to have had has finally shucked all of the early concerns that he had when he was kind of weirdly in the doghouse, and then he had an injury here, an injury there, a DNP this day. So, still, I'm a big fan of Ayuk. Njoku, sneaky good at tight end, probably a top 12 play this year, especially with Deshaun improving, although it was always a little finicky on how he used his tight ends in Houston. He wasn't, it was very Rodgers-esque, like, no, there wasn't always talent there, but also he never used them to maybe the potential that they could have. So we'll have to see. Tyler Lockett, big fan. I think he's going to have a good year in Seattle as long as Geno continues to do what he did last year. And then on the bench, we have a middling but okay group here. Khalil Herbert, who is currently the starting running back in Chicago, but there's some rumblings that by the middle of the year, Roshan Johnson might wind up taking that job. Zay Jones, who I like in Jacksonville, but he's going to lose volume now with Calvin Ridley there. MVS is going to have to take a step forward with Kansas City losing some receivers. And then another team strangely carrying just a whole bunch of tight ends. But, that's neither here nor there. We get to number 3. Gosh, we're at 30 minutes. Okay, well, the worst one I had last year was an hour long, so we're almost done, and we're only half an hour in. Number 3, 9-5 last year, losing in the first round to Jake King. Brad, who I think is a potential sleeping giant here that may be just a quarterback away from winning it all, because there is a lot to like on this roster, apart from Mac Jones. But besides that, you have stable production at running back. Christian McCaffrey is going to be, a contender for the number 1 running back in fantasy again. A lot of people's number 1 outside of potentially Justin Jefferson, especially in redraft leagues. Miles Sanders had the best year of his career last year, and now is the true lead back in Carolina on a team with a rookie quarterback, so they're going to want to lean on the run. Plus, he has, passing game chops that are always good for a rookie quarterback who wants to, have an outlet to throw down to. So, potential there. A.J. Brown still there, stud at receiver. And now, this year, after Brad has, as we'll even see later, continued to carry young talent at wide receiver, now Garrett Wilson finally ready to step into the spotlight and into the starting lineup. Could potentially be a very strong 1-2 punch there. And even Mike Williams at the flex, very strong wide receiver 3. We look down the bench and we see, some potential plays at running back, some deep plays, Cordero Patterson. Evan Hull is a backup for Indy now, but if Jonathan Taylor continues to be out, Evan Hull surprised a lot of people for Indy, especially with his pass protection and popping people right in the mouth. So he may wind up getting some play at some point if Taylor stays away from the team. But the true talent here on Brad's roster, the deep talent, is in the pass catchers. Rashad Bateman, if he can get healthy again, that offense could be really good if Lamar can execute it. Jahan Dotson, one of people's big trendy receiver picks this whole offseason, now that everyone's freaking out in Washington about how good Sam Howell's going to be. Wan'Dale Robinson, who had a little bit of a flash in the pan last year before having the major injury. Jalen Hyatt, who they also drafted to the Giants and is a very talented, later round receiver. And then Zay Flowers, who is some people's pick for, if it's not Bijan, I've seen a handful of people pick Zay Flowers for Rookie of the Year. And then even at tight end, like Michael Mayer. There's a lot to like here with these young, aspiring pass catchers on teams that may wind up using their volume sooner than perhaps we think. Like I said, Brad, maybe just a quarterback away from being a real title threat. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. Number 2, 11-3, a first-round bye last year, and a loss in what will be known henceforth and forevermore as the infamous Integrity Bowl. What would have been, Caleb being here. Oh, no, sorry. A nameless team. A nameless team would have been here right at the cusp, if not for the infamous Integrity Bowl. Otherwise, there's not a lot to dislike here. Mahomes is Mahomes. Mahomes is there. You set that. You never think about matchups. You never worry about anything. He's Mahomes. Running back potential with questions. Travis Etienne, is he a top-end running back producer, or is he a 20 to 30s kind of guy? They also, like we talked about with Seattle and Zach Charbonnet, they drafted Tank Bigsby, although a little bit later in the draft. Is he someone that's going to come in and take touches from Etienne? Cam Akers, finally late in the year for the Rams, started to get the workload he should have gotten when I had him in the early part of the year, but that's neither here nor there, or before I was going to have him there, and I managed to kind of dump him off. But he finally started getting the workload. Stafford is back, but obviously with injuries this last year, they're going to want to run the ball from time to time, especially now with the Cooper Kupp injury. So there's potential there for Akers to be a true blue number one. Receiver, loaded, obviously. Justin Jefferson, probably best receiver in football, number one receiver in fantasy. There's no reason to think that his volume or his numbers are going to decline. A middle of the offseason trade for this nameless team to swing CeeDee Lamb to bring into the starting lineup, and then wide receiver 3, Jalen Waddle. There's not a lot to dislike there. You're going to be setting these guys, and you're saying, cool, those 3 are probably going to combine to get me, 50 to 60 points every single week, just those guys. And then Mark Andrews at tight end, obviously a stud, top-end fantasy option. We look up and down the bench. We see some serviceable running back options, depending on how these situations go with their teams. Gus Edwards in Baltimore. We'll have to see what Dobbins can do. A.J. Dillon on a true timeshare in Green Bay. He will always get production. Kenneth Gainwell, again, iffy knowing if he's going to get the touches in the very crowded running back by committee backfield in Philly. But then fairly deep at receiver because you have the 3 that we just mentioned, and then also Mike Evans, also Chris Godwin, also Marquise Brown. And then suspended currently, Jamison Williams. So there's a lot to like here. I think that this nameless team that struggled in the Integrity Bowl will continue to contend for a championship this year, and clearly wants to get to that point, as clearly evidenced by the very excessive amount of trades that were done this offseason. But we come to the top. We come back to the 2-time 2021-2022 Hannibal Dynasty League champion. And that's your boy. That's your boy. The winner of 2 titles last year, the actual league title and victory in the Integrity Bowl, which really almost counts for double there. To be the best, you got to beat the best, all right? The 2-time is back. The best quarterback in fantasy football, Jalen Hurts. And he's probably going to do it again. They did not lose anything on that offense, really. Top 6 running backs. Barring injury, Eckler's going to be there. Chubb is going to be there. And now Kareem Hunt is gone. Deshaun Watson is hopefully better, but also maybe could just leave forever because nobody like him. 3 top 10 PPR receivers. But for real talk though, I don't love the Cooper Kupp injury. So if we could just say nice things about that and keep an eye on that, that'd be great. And the king of fantasy tight end scoring by a mile in Travis Kelce. Although also, can we because now he's got the knee thing, so let's make sure we keep an eye on that one and say good things. Although, if the trade-off is that Kansas City loses a little bit of a step, then I will gladly take the bullet here. Okay, and then swung the offseason move here, the 2-piece deal the 2-time did to flip Joe Mixon for Devontae Smith and Devontae Smith for Jahmyr Gibbs. Potential value there across 2 deals. Bench running backs, not great here because ain't none of y'all trading them because I've been trying. I've been trying for 7 months, and ain't nobody giving them up. Wide receiver depth, still solid. Jacoby Myers, Paris Campbell, both bigger roles on new teams. Also, not as big of an issue here because rather than playing a running back in flex, at least when everyone's healthy, Amari Cooper being the wide receiver 3, still a solid situation here. And sneaky future play, sneaky one. Sneaky. Sam Laporta. We'll see. We'll just see. Tight end in Detroit. I like what he does. I wished he'd been a Bengal. But that is our current preseason rankings. As I've said, particularly in regards back to Ryan's team, I think there are a handful in here that have the potential by that first quarter mark to really skyrocket, to really move up quickly, up into that top 5, top 4-ish. We'll have to see. Trades that we saw this offseason. The two that I had swung, the Mixon for Smith, Smith for Gibbs. We saw a Caleb and Corey deal. Justin Tucker for Cortland Sutton. That one's still strange to me. And it's rare that you see a kicker. Caleb and CJ, another Caleb deal. You'll find that as a common trend. I'm sorry, nameless. A nameless deal. We had a CeeDee Lamb for DeAndre Swift and a first rounder. We had another nameless and CJ deal. Cam Akers and Jamison Williams for picks and cash. CJ and Steven. Dawson Knox for Irv Smith, straight up 1-for-1. Nameless and Corey. Dalvin Cook for first rounder. Ryan and nameless individual. ETN for Stephon Diggs. Although this was really an extension of an earlier deal that happened between the two of them with Mike Evans and Stephon Diggs and Dalvin Cook. And then we come to some of the early ones this year. Aaron Rodgers and Debo for Alexander Mattison, Brandon Ayuk, and picks between Corey and Michael. We had between Michael and Ryan a Cousins, Thielen, Kamara swap for Brandon Cooks, James Cook, and a pick. I liked that one. I like these moving pieces to deals. People utilizing all their assets. That's the fun of Dynasty. Like I said, we had the original deal between unspoken, nameless person and Ryan. And then the earliest deal I believe we had this year was Derek Carr and Derrick Henry, the Derricks, for Josh Allen and Antonio Gibson between Corey and Sunshine. Shoot! I freaking tried. Maybe I just need to say, player is good, go on to next team, and take 5 minutes. Because I can't make this go shorter. We're at 42 minutes. All right, guys. Hopefully this will be uploaded sometime throughout the night. It'll be a nice little surprise for you guys there in the morning. As we return to the third season of the Hannibal Dynasty League. There are 11 teams that are beautiful, wonderful, excellent people, great fantasy owners who I have incredible respect for. There's one that we don't talk about, but that's neither here nor there. So good to see you guys. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you guys are ready for football. By the time you see this, it'll be later today. We got Chiefs-Lions kicking off the season. Hope everyone's doing great. Looking forward to year number 3. I'm glad we still got everyone in that we've had since the jump. Hope everyone's still having a good time. Signing off for now. The 2-time. Was glad to see you.